Bill Stanley, Republican from the 20th District, that's Southwest Virginia, part of Danville, Franklin, Halifax, and Pennsylvania. Senator Stanley, good to have you with us.
Thank you, Captain America. Happy Monday to you.
Well, thank you so much. Now, we thought you guys were going to be in the General Assembly. Some people say there's a special session. Dick Saslow says there's not. Kirk Cox says there is. You're a state senator. You guys seem to get a little sideways there a week ago Monday. What's the deal?
Well, John, we are in session. If you look at the Constitution of Virginia, which, of course, the Constitution matters, what we're looking at is Article 4, Section 6, which says one body cannot adjourn without consent of the other. And in other instances where one body went ahead and adjourned, the other body consented, I think the last time being 2002. Here, the House of Delegates has not consented. Therefore, under the Constitution, we are not adjourned. The special session is still in play. And what it does is it really puts the judiciary in peril because after the 17th of September, I believe that the governor can't reappoint a judge to the Supreme Court bench, leaving that open. And if he attempts to do so, what we're going to have is if she works on these cases and decides cases, say they're 4-3, that could put those cases in doubt. So I hope that the Democrats all come together and realize that it might have been pretty and good show and good political theater, but we're in session and we were tasked with two important obligations, and the first being redistricting and the second being picking a Supreme Court justice. And those are tasks which should not fall to political theater. We have an obligation to do the job that the people who elected us sent us there to do.
Senator Stanley, let me get this straight. So basically the ploy of the Democrats and Senator Watkins, your colleague who abandoned ship, I mean, it is what it is,
yeah,
to adjourn. There's Republicans like yourself telling me that the strategy to adjourn was simply so that Terry McAuliffe could have an adjourned session where he could then reestablish his judicial selection, Judge Jane Roush, when her first appointment is up September 17th, that if you're not in session, then he can simply reappoint her a second time, taking her to January, and then, of course, the gamble would be that the Democrats win control of the Senate. I don't think they are, and then obviously he'd be able to put her in there. You know, absent of that, what I hear you saying now is that constitutionally you're not adjourned, and so the governor is not going to have the authority to resubmit the name as an interim judicial appointment for Judge Roush because you're not adjourned. You're in session, right?
That's exactly right. Under the Constitution, with the appointment of a Supreme Court justice, if we're in session, it is subject to approval by the General Assembly within 30 days or it expires. So if we're in session, and the Constitution plainly tells us we are still in special session, then her term expires in September 17th. Because we're in session, having taken no action, she cannot be reappointed. And so that's where we're going to see a constitutional crisis occur, and an issue which will have to be decided whether the act of the governor is a legal one or not a legal one. And certainly, as I said, it would threaten the Virginia Supreme Court's decisions. I'm to understand they have a fairly good-sized docket in September, and if she's sitting under the belief that she's been reappointed, and it turns out that that appointment was illegal, certainly then any decision that she would have rendered, any vote she would have taken, would then be in peril, and certainly I think the wheels of justice come to a halt. So we need to get back in there. We need to have fair hearings. Let's interview anybody who wants to be a Supreme Court justice who is qualified to do so. Let's look at maps. Let's get things done. I mean, John, when they were even talking, and I know the governor said, well, Republicans never proposed a map, so they weren't serious. We were serious. We're getting ready to drop maps. Quite frankly, they didn't even give us the opportunity to consider their maps. We might have liked one of theirs, but they didn't give us that opportunity. It was political show and theater, and I think it has some real serious effects on Virginia governance that I think they didn't think all the way through. It was a very clever plan that caught us on our heels, But I think, it's one thing to win a battle, but it's another thing to win a war. And quite frankly, I don't think they had an exit strategy or a second step to their step plan.
So, Senator Stanley, what you're saying is that if Governor McAuliffe goes ahead and resubmits in an interim basis again on September 17th, Judge Roush, that anything that she rules over potentially September 18th and beyond could be open for that all of her decisions could be open for what? Constitutional interpretation, crisis, revocation, what?
Well, let me give you an example. As a lawyer, let's say I have an appeal before the Supreme Court. It's an issue that is important. On the 18th of September, Governor McAuliffe, the day before, has reappointed her. We're still in session, and it's deemed to be not a good appointment, but she sits anyway. She decides my case. She decides the case against me 4-3, against my client. But then it's ruled later that she wasn't even supposed to be there to sit. What do you do then? What happens to that decision? I think it throws it out. And I think even the Supreme Court would look at this and where we are right now very carefully, because it certainly doesn't want to have to relitigate cases, and it certainly doesn't want to have those issues where that could occur. So if that client loses in a 4-3 decision, she's on the floor side. I think you have those decisions being vacated and reheard, and certainly right now at the court we have a 3-3 court if she's not on there. So there's subject to a lot of ties. Those are real possibilities. So this is an issue that has to be worked out by both sides. We all need to, as you say, be big boys and wear big boy pants and figure out how we're going to do what is right. And certainly, once we put down the partisanship and the long knives, I think a resolution can be had. But we also need to resolve the redistricting. We have to resolve the judgeships. And right now, I think a lot of legislators, including the governor in the executive branch, are not thinking about what is the task at hand, but thinking about what's coming in November and about power and control and re-election and the races. And that kind of distraction is really not a good thing. We need to understand that we're tasked with the job of governance. Elections come later.
Senator Stanley, what happens to a judicial nomination in the Senate in the event of a 2020 tie? What happens?
Well, in our Senate, the president of the Senate, which is the lieutenant governor, is allowed to break ties when there is what's called in the Constitution an equal division. The couple things he cannot vote for to break the tie, one being the budget and the second being judges. So if it's a 2020 tie, then the judicial nomination fails in the Senate.
So then there just wouldn't be one. That seat would remain open until you got 21 for someone.
That's correct.
It would just
That's correct. You have to have a majority of the body, which is 21.
Right. So, okay. So the lieutenant governor was able to break the tie for adjournment, but he can have no say in this instance in a selection for a judge. Senator, last week on our show, actually, I think it was on Wednesday, the Godfather Dick Saslow was on, and he's like, look, all the Republicans want to do is destroy Terry McAuliffe. They don't like Terry McAuliffe, period. And so he said, that's what this whole thing is about. Now, here's my question. As far as Governor McAuliffe is concerned, what do you think the plan is here? What do you think is his end game?
Well, first, John, I'd be one to disagree with you, or I disagree with the Godfather, my friend Dick Saslow, because I like the governor. I like him personally. I think when he talks about creating jobs and economic opportunities for Virginians, he does very well. And I've even mentioned to him that, this is a 4-year job, and the first 2 is getting your feet wet and starting your political agenda and your legislative agenda. The last 2 is really about building a legacy. So you're somewhere up the list of Virginia governors near that Jefferson guy. Their statement that we just hate him and this is why we're making it bad, I think is just false. But then, you asked me before we left, what's the end game? I'm puzzled because, it seems that on one hand, the Democrats have a strategy, which is to throw into doubt all redistricting lines. They have a 35-state strategy of lawsuits like we have here in Virginia regarding the congressional district lines and the maps that were drawn, trying to get them thrown out, get them redrawn that will create advantages for them politically in the House of Representatives. What they did was they sacrificed, I guess, that strategy where they could have had us come in, drop maps, debate maps, which, while on appeal, could have mooted the appeal that is going on right now of that case, and that would have been precedent for them to go on to these other states. So if that was their strategy to drag us in on redistricting, and then sacrifice it because ultimately it became really a match of wits because they were so hung up on this one judge to become a justice, and she is a justice for now, that they're willing to sacrifice, I think, a bigger Democrat strategy for what was a short form victory in the papers for one day. And again, so I'm puzzled. I don't know where they can go from here that's successful for them, except, you would think they tried to use the war on women, that we were against Judge Roush because she was a woman, when in fact the Republicans have put more women on the bench at both appellate levels and at circuit court levels than at any time before. And they can't, and what frustrates them even more is that Rossi Alston, a very fine judge of the Court of Appeals, was our selection, was allowed for, in history, no other state in the Union has had 3 African-American sitting justices at the same time on their highest court of the state. They prevented that kind of history, so they can't use the racial undertones or overtones that they try to use. There's no real thing that they can carry back into these races, the Senate races and House races that are coming up in November, to try to put on a mailer or point a finger, because I think ultimately it was a net loss for them, at most a push. But to ask me what their long-term strategy is, I'm baffled. I'm not the guy, I'm not Kreskin, I can't tell into the future, but it certainly seems to me that this, while it looked good on paper, was great press for one day, was not properly well thought out.
Well, the only plausible explanation that I can come up with, just my conjecture, is that they wanted to find an issue that was real in their minds, that they could continue to go on ahead with their war on women mantra, that this whole thing was put up for that reason, because I really can't see. I mean, I kind of agree with you. One day they did win that battle. I don't see what they're going to do going forward. Now, as far as what Saslow said, and we've got about just a minute. What Saslow said is like, this whole thing is moot anyway, because whatever maps you guys had, McAuliffe was going to veto. It's going to go back, get vetoed. At the end of the day, it's going to get turned over to the 3-judge panel anyway. So why waste time and money?
Well, that's, and again, that's a loser strategy, and that's like somebody trying to explain a loss. And with all due respect to my friend Dick Saslow, letting the 3-judge panel determine Virginia is not a good way for us to conduct the redistricting as it's mandated in our state constitution. On top of that, John, what we're talking about here is simply this. They're saying, well, we weren't going to pass them out because anything you did, the governor's going to veto. They never gave us a chance. So how do they know? Well, you know why? Because they weren't going to allow any constructive process to occur. Because it may have, if it drawn out, looked worse for them. And so they shut it down illegally, and then can say, well, they weren't going to do anything, so that's why we're going home. That's a shallow, hollow argument in my mind.
That's going to be the final word. We want to thank Senator Bill Stanley for being with us, trucking the truth. Want more info? Go to StanleyForSenate.com. That's StanleyForSenate.com.